Okay. I saw the packet for that.
That guy's looking hard for Joe. Yeah.
Here.
Director Chisholm?
Here.
Director Calandry?
Here.
Director Tebow?
Here.
Director Atkinson?
Here.
Craig Carson?
Here.
And Phyllis Stanton?
Here.
Adoption of the agenda. So moved. We have a motion to adopt the agenda. We have a second. 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 All those in favor?
Aye.
Public comment on non-agenda items. Special presentations, none. Consent agenda. Minutes.
I'll move approval of the consent calendar.
We have a motion for consent.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Advisory committee report. Minutes.
Good morning. Dennis Lamro with the Advisory Committee. We did have a meeting last week, and the summary of the meeting is included in the board packet. I can answer questions on the memo, but that's about it.
No questions.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, applications.
Yes, good morning, I'll take this one. So included in your packet, beginning on page 20, is our typical resolution that approves small pumper qualifiers, as well as monitoring wells and replacement wells. So if you look on page 21, attached to the resolution, you can see we have one small pumper qualifying domestic well, which is in the southeast sub-area. We have one replacement well of a known small pumper that's in the central angle.
Matt, can you hold it 1 second? Can whoever's on the line mute their cell phone or conference cell phone? We're getting a lot of static. It's hard to hear. Sorry, go
All
ahead.
right, thank you. And then we have a total of 8 new monitoring wells that are in the central antelope area on 2 different APNs or parcels. And then we have one additional monitoring well, which is in the southeast area for Little Rock Creek Irrigation District. So admin staff reviewed all these applications and we're recommending approval of each of them, as well as resolution number R19-30.
Discussion or questions?
What are the monitoring wells for?
So one of them on APN 3048-018-910 is for Little Rock Creek Irrigation District. And then the other 8, you can see on APN 3137-015-036, there's 3 monitoring wells. That's for Petrolock. They're a fuel supplier. And then on APN 3137-015-054, there's an additional 5 monitoring wells under MJNA, which is also part of Petrolock. So those 8 are associated with a fueling facility, a fuel storage facility. And then, as I mentioned, the other one is for Little Rock Creek Irrigation District.
And I understand it's the EPA that requires the monitoring well?
It's either EPA or the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board.
Will the Watermaster get any water quality data from the monitoring as well?
Yeah, I think that's in the application. That there's a note that we shall receive any data collected from those water monitoring wells.
Any other questions or comments? We have a motion for resolution 1930.
Also move approval of resolution R 19-30.
Motion,
Second?
second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Transfers. That Phyllis?
Yes.
Yes, good morning. So on page 91 of your packet, you have a table showing the 2 transfers. There's 4 different lines on the table, but the first 2 are one transfer and the bottom 2 are another. It just has to do with how the transfers are being divvied up. The first transfer is for county sanitation districts 14 and 20. They are listed as one party on Exhibit 4 currently, and they would like acknowledgement from the Watermaster and Water Accounting that they are dividing up their total allotment on Exhibit 4 into 2 separate allotments, 3,060 acre-feet a year to District 14 and 304 acre-feet to District 20. Handled this similarly with other parties in the past through a transfer. It just makes sure that the details are included on the transfer forms, and it makes it easier for us to keep up with how the allocations are being put. There are tables inserted in both our analysis of it as well as their information provided during the application, and it seems very straightforward to us, with the exception that for 2019 that there was only one transfer against that amount, and so we've corrected for that. But other than that, this is just simply a party taking its current Exhibit 4 productive rights and splitting it into 2, assigning it to a certain amount to District 14 and a certain amount to District 20. So that seems very straightforward. The last 2 entries on the table of Exhibit A relate to the July 2019 settlement agreement with, this is a small pumper party, Garrick, who is, they are a small pumper, but they have been pumping over their 3 acre-foot allotment, and the Watermaster Council has been working diligently with their council to come up with a settlement agreement that you reviewed in July of 2019. And in that settlement agreement, they agreed to seek and secure a transfer for the amount of their overpumping so that they would not have to incur a replacement water assessment. And this is for their 2018 pumping. They were required to replace 400 acre-feet, and because they're a small pumper, they're allotted 3 acre-feet a year, so this transfer is for the 397 remaining acre-feet, again, simply to cover pumping that has already occurred. So because it has already occurred, there's no, there isn't anything to evaluate with respect to material injury. So neither of these transfers are related to any material injury for that analysis. So I would recommend approval of these per your resolution on page 90.
And if I could just add a comment to that. The packet that was distributed to everybody prior to the meeting and on the website had a different table attached to it. We've corrected it for your board packets that you're looking at now. So the change was on what was distributed last week under Sanitation District, District 20. It was listed as 304 acre-feet. It should have been 340 acre-feet. It's transferred. And then we clarified that the original producer is districts number 14 and 20.
Yes. I don't understand why they would let the water rights be 40.
I'm not sure if anybody here is from the sanitation district, but my understanding is that they treat the 2 districts as 2 different entities. So they wanted to split up the assets between those two, and then between District 14 and District 20.
Okay, I get that. Now legally, does this have any material value to it?
I don't see a material injury analysis being applicable to this.
Well, no, that's not what I meant. Maybe the one material. So when at the judgment stage, the sanitation district was giving or allocated or allowed a specific amount of water, is the split interfere with that?
Well, it
judgment?
happens in personal transactions all the time when people die and their property is conveyed to an heir who then splits it with the other heir over the water rights. So we have experience with doing this with other individuals. So, as long as they're subject, they're bound by the terms of the judgment. I think we have control of it, and they pass the material injury analysis that Chris would do, where I think we have good control over the situation.
If anyone's asking questions of me, I can't hear what's being said at all.
This is Adam. I was asking a question of Craig.
Okay, thank you.
Then I have this is John Flandry. This now settles the Derrick case, is that correct?
That's right.
Well, everybody's made whole and
That's right.
we leave them alone.
She's fulfilled her obligations.
Very good.
I just want to say, the benefit of having parties that stand up to their obligations, we were willing to work with her. She, in good faith, met every condition that we put to her. And that, as opposed to folks that are kind of avoiding enforcement, which I'll talk about later, was a real pleasure to have her come forward and be very forthright about the situation, which we were willing to work with and get resolved.
We're going to talk about that in a few minutes.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
So, all our questions and comments? We have a motion for resolution 1931.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Antelope Valley State Water Contractors Association replacement water. All right, good morning. I'll take this one. Before you on page 115, you have the new and improved Antelope Valley State Water Contractors Association agreement for the purchase of replacement water. It's run the gauntlet from the advisory committee back to the association through Watermaster Council, and it seems to be everyone's in agreement with it at this point. The key provision that is beefed up is that it lays out more clearly the process of consultation with the Watermaster engineer for replacement of the water in the basin. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Peter, you're referring to section C, resolving the conflict or clarification. On the recitals, I'm sorry, 115.
Where do you look to?
Yes, it's actually paragraph 3 on page 116. Paragraphs 1, 2, and 3 would make it clear how the obligations flow. There's substantial revisions that went on from our end, and then there was input from the advisory committee that was incorporated and a number of other individuals. But a lot of time and effort went into the process to get language that would be understandable.
And the advisory committee is now in agreement on this?
I have to ask Dennis. I know they've given input. We've gotten input from them.
Dennis, can I put you on the spot on that?
Always. And we did discuss this last week, and the committee's satisfied with this current form of agreement. The only concern that we had last month was that consultation with the Watermaster as to the placement of the water, and that was addressed.
Thank you very much.
You need to adopt this new agreement. And a motion to adopt.
I'll move to adopt the approval of the replacement water agreement between the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors Association and the Antelope Valley Watermaster.
Second.
Second.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Groundwater contracting income.
All right, good morning. I'll take this one and Phyllis can chime in on the details. But admin staff, as well as the ad hoc committee of the board, which is Director Riki and Atkinson, have been discussing scope of work for 2020 and 2021 for Todd groundwater. And we'll get into that on the next item. But this item has to do.
Just a moment, whoever's on the phone, it's got background static. If you could mute your line, whoever's on the conference call line, we're getting a lot of feedback in here. Thank you.
So this item has to do with an amendment with Todd Groundwater to get through the remainder of 2019. And I got a few slides to kind of summarize it. If you could advance, Patty, next slide.
Sorry. Sure, your angel come help me. I know.
You may advance it one.
Really? No, I can't. Oh, there we go.
There we go. All right. Well, this is obviously small, so you can read this. But this is a summary of Todd Groundwater's current budget for calendar year 2019. You can see the 6 different tasks that we have for them. The total budget amount for this year was about $161,000. If you recall, we previously trimmed that down quite a bit from what they originally proposed as part of the 3-year proposal. So we trimmed that down. We also did a couple of amendments throughout the year. If you recall, we shifted some funding to regarding the meter compliance back to Todd Groundwater that we trimmed out. That includes amendment number 3. So what you have in your board packet is what the ad hoc committee and staff requested from Todd Groundwater to get them through the rest of this year. Because as you can see on the screen, we've used up all the funds that we had budgeted for 2019. And go to page 122 of your packet. You can see that they're requesting a total of $50,000 under this amendment. And it's broken up between 4 tasks. Task number 1, $3,000. As you know, we want to put more effort into wrapping up the rules and regulations for the Watermaster. So that's where a big part of the effort will be, $2,400, $6,400, and continuing with the meter compliance at $8,000. And then you can see we had some additional work that was outside the budget during the months of August and September of just over $10,000. So that's where the $50,000 came up with. We came up with for their amendment. This is to show where we're at year to date with our budget. So you're probably asking where we're going to come up with $50,000, and this is what our proposal is. So you can see we're recommending to pull $25,000 from admin staff. We are going to adjust that budget down by $25,000. You can see we still have $28,950 to get through the end of the year, so we're under budget for the admin staff, and that's primarily AVAC and Palmdale Water District's time. So we should be in good shape there, even with the adjustment. And then if you go down towards the bottom under legal services, we had $255,000 budgeted for this calendar year. We're recommending to shift the additional $15,000 from that budget over to Todd groundwater and reduce that from 255 down to 240. You can see we still have $68,000 available for legal, and that should be plenty to get us through the end of this calendar year. And then just below that, you can see where we're recommending to increase the Watermaster engineer's budget from $166,000 to $216,000. And that will allow Phyllis and her team to focus on those 4 tasks that I mentioned, primarily to work on the rules and regulations and get that over to Craig and his team to start reviewing. Oh, I'm sorry, I mentioned 25,000 from admin, it's actually 35,000. So the 35 plus 15 makes up the 50. So that is staff's recommendation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Have we done the supplemental billing or assessment?
The variable?
Right. And is there any outstanding bills or?
There's roughly, I want to say about $10,000 in outstanding administrative assessments.
And are these the same people that have not been paid?
It's same characters, yeah.
Same character. So are we doing anything about that or to collect?
We have some collection news in my report, but it's not specifically on administrative assessment.
All right.
It's kind of the state of the union when it comes to our collection process.
Yes, in looking over the scope of work, I had, I guess, somewhat of a, I don't know if it's a policy or philosophical difference in the descriptions under the rules and regulations of the second paragraph on 121. Their second paragraph there talks about it basically says, importantly, we see developing a brief section describing the Watermaster engineer's approach to material injury analysis. And in this section, they talk about that the most critical role that the Watermaster engineer has is the material injury analysis, and we agree with that. I mean, I agree with that. And but the idea of trying to develop a process for this, I'm not sure that that's a particularly wise move, given the very vast range of various projects that you may have for material injury. I think each one of those projects, whether it's a water bank storage agreement or a private individual well, will have a completely different set of criteria for what that material analysis would be. I think it's important that any change in the pumping or the storage or otherwise within the basin get reviewed for the most critical role. However, the physical solution is the plan for how to address the problems within the groundwater basin, and that's what the judge approved as our plan moving forward. And I think it's we don't need to get into the position of providing mitigation measures for potential applicants who want to potentially impact the groundwater basin. I would rather see us have the applicants provide the analysis of material injury and allow the Watermaster engineer to analyze those to see if they meet muster or not, and then at that point potentially work with the party to get a material injury discussion. I don't believe it is the Watermaster's job to manage the groundwater basin in any way. That's left for the parties that have rights and have governmental responsibilities to manage the groundwater basin. More, I think it's Watermaster's role is to analyze the conditions of the basin and and to determine whether the physical solution is really doing what it was intended to do, and then potentially make recommendations there. So I'd like to see, my recommendation would be to have Phyllis kind of take a look at that section again and see if that is really appropriate to have a procedural mechanism for the material injury. And I would like to have the scope of work changed to avoid the term of basin management, because I do believe that's not part of the Watermaster's core responsibilities.
I wonder if I might be able to respond.
Yes.
Thank you. I certainly hear the concern for the person making the comments regarding the material injury analysis. And frankly, the reason that I was suggesting that we include it was because every time we do a material injury analysis, we have continuing questions from the applicant. It's like, well, how are you doing this? Are you doing this consistently? Did you do this for other people? Did you say this elsewhere? And so, and recognizing for the point that the judgment lists the physical solution material injury process, absolutely. The rule and regulations, however, I think provide a process by which those passages in the judgment are actually implemented and actually moved forward. So it seemed to us that it would be helpful to have a construct. The construct being, of course, guided by what the description is in the judgment, but also providing some additional clarification for each one of the details that are going to be analyzed. Essentially, all material injury analyses are going to be looking at groundwater levels, groundwater storage, groundwater quality, whether or not land subsidence is impacted, whether or not recharge into the basin is impacted. Those are all details in the judgment that are required for analysis by the Watermaster engineer. And parties have difficulties understanding how that's being applied. And we continually have questions on that. As you know, we are doing everything on a fee-based, so we can't possibly, I just feel like it would be cost prohibitive to go into a detailed analysis and write a 4 or 5 page memo for every application that comes in and every material injury analysis that we have. We've already gotten comments from the advisory committee that they don't quite understand our abbreviated assessments that we're providing in response to the material injury analysis. So I feel like that this is something that would help rather than overstep. And I would just say this, give us an opportunity. The preparation of the rules and regulations are our mandate in the judgment. Give us an opportunity to place this into the draft rules and regulations. You will have more than 2 or 3 or as many bites at the apple as you'd like with respect to you don't feel like that the language in certain areas is appropriate. I get that. And, you know, that's the process we're getting ready to go through is this back and forth. You might recall that for the rules and regulations that we have approved by the court so far, there were numerous drafts, in some cases as many as 6 drafts per topic. And many things got deleted and rewritten. And I just will assure you, the Watermaster engineer took every single comment that was provided to us and addressed it in some manner, in a very transparent way, I hope, and I think that we'd like to continue that. So again, I will do as the board wishes. I do see that monitoring of safe yield and all of the details that the Watermaster engineer has given in the judgment all relate to groundwater management. My goodness, that is the role of managing the basin, is to prevent the material injuries. So, so I respectfully understand exactly what was said. I don't want to overstep boundaries. I don't want to do anything outside of the judgment, obviously. And I just want to assure everyone that if you give us the opportunity to provide this, because again, this is in response to so many requests that we've had for consistency and transparency by the applicants that have provided information to us. Give us an opportunity to respond to them by putting this in. And if you feel like it is inappropriate and you'd like to continue to make that comment and the board agrees, then it will be out. This is not asking for a tremendous level of effort to get it in. So I would just respectfully request that we be given the opportunity to everyone know how we're thinking about the process.
Well, I will respond to this based on your comments, fellows. This is Dwayne Chisholm, and I believe that providing specifications of what should be contained within a material injury analysis is appropriate. But as far as having an exact procedure for each particular project, I think it'll be burdensome, and quite frankly, I don't think it would be particularly helpful. And because I want to maintain that the applicant has the burden of proving that there's no material injury and not have that be thrust on the Watermaster and the Watermaster engineer, given our budgetary stats. Analysis, some specifications, or some of the key components that need to be analyzed by the applicant. I think that is an appropriate thing to give direction to whoever the applicant might be, and would provide some, as you say, transparency and some consistency. But I would like to avoid getting into a long and lengthy application, form type process to have that move forward.
Absolutely, Dwayne. I agree with you 100%, and I understand exactly what you're saying, and I agree with it. And if I've written that in any other way, I didn't mean to. Certainly, another point I wanted to assure the commenter before is that even though I have the sentence in there that the judgment requires mitigation of potential impacts, I would never overstep to actually begin to propose specific mitigation to any impact now. That would be inappropriate, and that would have to be done on a case-by-case basis.
Questions?
The way I understand Dwayne, correct me if I'm wrong, fellas, he's saying that the burden, can you hear me, fellas?
Yes, I can.
This is Adam. I think what I understand Dwayne saying is that we want to put the burden on the applicants, and then we review the material engineering analysis that performed by them. Is that correct, Dwayne?
That's correct.
So, thus far, I think you've been doing the analysis yourself, right?
Yeah.
So I think we need to kind of look at is that the direction we want to go? In other words, are we going to start asking folks to demonstrate the material engineering analysis? In other words, hire their own hydrogeological individual to do the analysis and then submit it, and then you verify it?
I think it depends on the situation. I think, if we're talking about very, very different applications for storage agreements, especially existing storage, we anticipated that there would be a sufficient record, administrative record and analysis by others that would provide the sufficient information for a material injury analysis. I think we still have to put our eyes on the analysis by others with respect to what is required in the judgment and make sure that that's included. But for other applications, we've had no one provide us any details of material injury analysis. Certainly, the applications for new production, there has to be a statement that is stamped by a civil engineer as required by the judgment about material injury. But essentially, those applications, at least to date, have been incredibly benign because it's almost de minimis production. So I think it depends, in answer to your question directly, Adam, I think it depends on the application. And I think that Dwayne might be mentioning storage agreements has a lot more information.
Okay. So what you're proposing in the rules and regulations is to develop a framework for how this analysis needs to be done?
Yes, and it's you know, give me an opportunity to write that. The very first, I mean, even though I see this as very important, the first sentence in that paragraph says a brief section. This is not, I'm not planning to write up, and it's certainly not going to be a form. That would be completely inappropriate. There are too many details associated with each application that must stand on it.
All
right. I thought this would be helpful, and again, I am responding to applicants who have, you know, asked me to help them interpret the little paragraph in the judgment. And it was like, you know, they said, well, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. And there's been some frustration and questions about, are the analyses being consistently applied? So I just felt like that in the spirit of transparency and appropriateness for what we do, that it might be helpful if I actually suggested how we view it and how we approach it. And maybe that's what I missed when I wrote the paragraph. Maybe I should have said that really it's more of an approach to the process of material injury analysis. I'm not being very articulate now, but anyway, I would ask again that we have the opportunity to give you what we have in mind. I think it will be incredibly benign once you see it, and I think it will be also helpful, I would hope, once you see it. And if not, I'm happy to strike it at that moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments? So do we do the rules and regs update?
I believe there's,
Yeah, we need a motion.
we need a motion to
approve the amendment.
The amended scope of work.
Is there a motion on E?
I'll move to approve the amended scope of work with the comments that, with regards to the, that were contained in the, whatever that task order was.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Was that for the scope of work or for the amendment?
For the amendment.
For the amendment?
For the amendment.
Rules and reg update?
Oh, actually, can we go back one item?
Okay, go ahead.
So we just talked about the amendment. Item E, the 2020 and 2021 scope of work. So that begins on page 124. And this staff worked with Phyllis and her team to lay out a scope of work for following 2 years, calendar years. The advisory committee reviewed this, and our recommendation is to, if the board concurs, utilize this information in drafting our draft budget, which we plan to present to the advisory committee first part of November for review. Well, we're going to submit it to the advisory committee in November and then bring it back to the board in December.
Okay.
So this is more of an information. We're not looking for approval of this scope of work at this time.
My comment on these numbers here is I'd like to figure out how we can get our annual report to not be our most expensive item. If we're accumulating the data through the whole year, it should be fairly easy to punch out a report because most of the boilerplate from
Prior years.
Part of the reason for including the same amount of budget for the 2020 in particular was that we are trying to better fulfill the requirements of the judgment of the annual report. I would like to think that every year it gets a little bit better. And one of the things that we've not been doing is to provide some details regarding the safe yield components. We've just been essentially popping them into the annual report as best we can. At this point, we are still trying to determine where part wells are in the basin, where pumping centers are occurring, and other details. And so our thought is that we would continue to improve the annual report, but we're happy to do boilerplate, whatever you'd like.
Just a comment.
Very good, thank you.
And I have a personal point of clarification on the 2019 budget. Is it legal for me to make a statement as to how I feel if the $50,000 to finish 2019 runs over that?
Sure. You can make a statement.
Okay, I will not vote for an increase, anything over that. So a warning to the engineer, I will be a no vote if they come back and say they cannot hit that $50,000 for the rest of 2019. Is that an appropriate statement?
It's your sentiment on the board, and you're welcome to express it.
Okay, very good, thank you.
So you don't need any action from us on this?
No, not for items.
Rules and reg update? Phyllis, that's you.
So, yeah, we were hoping that you would approve it, and so we've begun it. We already have a draft, and that has gone to Craig once, but it is incomplete. And we are attempting to take what had been provided to us from the public water suppliers and repurpose as much of that as we could, and also the rules of order that have been developed over time by the advisory committee. Get that into a completely different outline, rework the document, and get it back to Craig again. There's been so much that has been developed over this past year, especially from a legal standpoint, that we now want to get into the rules and regulations. And so Craig will begin working on that as well. And we also have, I see that staff included a little diagram, a little process diagram on the schedule, which is shown on your board packet in 131. This is the schedule that we had talked to them about, that we would provide the next draft version to the Watermaster Council in November for their review. And then you can see that as we end 2019, it's just a matter of going back and forth and doing some iterative details on the rules and regulations, finishing that up by the end of the year, providing it to the advisory committee in January, for a public hearing potentially in February, depending on how everybody views it in January, and then a final draft presented to the board of directors in March.
So on this little flow chart we've got here, has 2 December 19s. Craig's got some things and Todd's got some things. Is that going to be at our December 18th meeting, both of them?
No, it surely be. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I was going to just say we certainly could provide an update at that time.
It says revisions completed by. That's what I'm looking for.
Yes.
Revision
Yes.
stuff.
Well,
So
that by us, by the end of the year, I mean, we will try to have that ready at the 18th for a quick review if you'd like, but our schedule right now is to make sure that it is available for the advisory committee when they meet in early January or mid-January.
Now, my goal is not for another arrow that says April or May on it. So,
Yeah, well, that's, we all have the same goal.
well, being the chairman today, I'm gonna push that one a little harder. At the 19th, 18th.
I hear you, and I give you my word that that will not be April or May.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Administrator report?
I will take this one. This is an informational item about the water, the IDing of the water meters. Staff has developed a system that will help ID those water meters. It will be helpful for the purpose of tracking them physically where those wells are and the meters are, as well as tracking the production reporting. So starting on page 133, you can see the meter ID tag that we're planning on having at the individual meters. And then moving on to page 134, it's kind of a breakdown on how that ID system works. And page 135 goes through it in a little more detail. But functionally, we're going to be starting off with the sub area, the sub basin that the well is located in. And then the next portion will be class. What exhibit are you on in the judgment? And then your position within that class. So you would click down on the exhibit by that number and find the owner of that well. And then the well in sequence. Which well is it? This would be the part where the owner would have some feedback. Is this well 1, 2, 3, or 4 within your production? And then finally, the meter sequence. So A would be the original meter. Eventually, as meters were replaced, you would move on in different iterations to B, C, D, etc. We just want to lay that out for you.
Is this some kind of brass plaque or something that we're gonna attach to the meter or the pipe next to the meter or something? What is the physicality of that?
It's a hard plastic.
Hard plastic?
It's a hard plastic, and it'll have a metal tag that you'll wrap. We're gonna request that they'll take a picture of the meter tag with, in the same picture of the meter reading is on, and, that's about.
No, I mean, this is excellent, because now you'll be able to look up a number and you say, oh, that's not here, it's over there. I think that'd be super helpful over time. Excellent.
So the next item is just an update on the outstanding production report. Begin on page 137 of your packet is a summary, and then there's a couple of subsequent pages that give the detail of which parties or producers have not produced their production reports. And then the last item we have is an update on the storage agreements. If you recall at the last meeting, the board reviewed the applications and comments provided by Todd Groundwater on a couple of storage agreements, one for Roseman Community Services District and one for Little Rock Creek Irrigation District. So Craig and his team have drafted the actual agreements, and those have been provided to those two agencies for review and comment, and we hope to bring back those agreements to the board at the December meeting. And that's all I have to report unless there are any questions.
Thank you. What page was the storage agreements on? Is that?
Oh, there's nothing
No
in the
page
packet.
there.
That was just a vote.
Watermaster engineer report.
I don't have any additional to add. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Any questions? General counsel.
Yeah, an update on a few things related to enforcement, which is a continuing issue that we want to keep forefront of our minds in this matter. We've been in discussions, well, first, obviously Becky Derrick is a tremendous step forward. Her council represents several small pumpers who are pumping in excess of their pumping right under the judgment, and ones that are pumping, we believe, extremely large quantities above what they're allowed to under the judgment. So we've had communication with this council about one of their clients in particular. We are very far apart in terms of how we view what their responsibility is to pay a replacement water assessment for 2018. We believe that they've irrigated over 110 acres, and they believe it's only 60. Phyllis has been in assistance with us in how to prove that up, but it does not appear that we're making very much progress. So I'll be prepared at the next meeting to tell you how we should proceed, but at this point, we're in negotiations, but we're getting the same response. They have electrical records that they say shows they only irrigated 60, and we have infrared photographs of the property during 2018 that indicate to us it's much higher than that. So people that aren't compliant and make a substantial difference to the basin first, and that's why we're focusing our energies there. When I came to the staff this morning, they handed me a number of folks that they have found that are either defaulted members of the judgment who are pumping in excess of the terms of the judgment. In fact, if they're defaulted, they don't have a right to pump. And there's a number of them mutual water companies that we're going to get letters from council before the next month is over. In fact, immediately. And their metering is questionable, and we'll raise that issue with them also. But again, the focus is to go after larger producers initially. But these are folks that your diligent staff have found have not complied with the judgment. In fact, are in default and are pumping willfully with no consequence at this point. So we'll make contact with them, tell them in very direct language what's expected of them. They're parties to the judgment, they need not intervene, but they need to fill out a new production application. And then we'll talk about enforcement if they don't. And again, I understand my charge is to shift costs as much as can be to people that require us to go to court to enforce their obligations under the judgment. At this point, we haven't done that with anyone. Becky Derrick was kind of the test case, and I hope that our council will work with us on his other clients. The Derrick update has already been mentioned. The status of the SCI's motion to intervene. This has been on your before you for many months. This is Joshua Memorial Park. Effort to intervene in the judgment to become identified as a stipulating party and be given a production right. And we agreed by resolution a couple of months ago that they could intervene. But there's questions. I've been in touch with other council about whether opposition is going to be filed to this effort to intervene. I don't plan on filing opposition at this point. But apparently there are some or a number of other council that plan to do that. I'll at least reserve the right to review their opposition, if appropriate, join it, or weigh in separately. But right now, the arguments against the intervention relate to whether Joshua Memorial Park was actually a party to the judgment from the beginning, whether they should be subject to ramp down provisions and not just be given a production right, ramp down that everyone else had to go through, and that they need to have, it needs to be an evidentiary hearing. That's what I'm hearing from other council, that this isn't going to be handled by a court call on November 7th, but they want evidence where actually their production right is proven up. So again, I would, my approach to SCI is they have the right to intervene. They need to prove up their case before Judge Comar, and if there's evidence that they failed in doing that, they'll pay the consequence for it. But they're asking to get a production right. That right under the judgment is not subject to the ability to carry over or transfer. So it's a restricted right, but it's 122 acre-feet a year. It's not insignificant. But again, this is a party we've worked in good faith with. They've been very forthright about this process, and they've worked on it for 6 months. And we agreed they could intervene to prove it up. So that's what they're going to do. They have a hearing set for November 7th to do just that, and we'll report. I don't have any predictions about what the court may do. I haven't seen the opposition papers of other counsel, but I've been led to understand that it's definitely going to be opposed. The update on Phelan Pinion Hills filed a motion to essentially prevent enforcement of replacement water assessment for 2016, 2017, and 2018. Their argument is we can't enforce replacement water assessment against them until we adopt rules and regulations under the judgment. I think that's misplaced, and we'll deal with that. Second, they say that their appeal stays enforcement of collecting on any of the replacement water assessments. And third, they believe that there wasn't adequate evidence for you to adopt the RWAs as to them, and that Reftelis financial analysis report has got problems. We're in the middle of preparing opposition for that. We obviously disagree on every point. We did have some discussions with Phelan's counsel, some communications about how to potentially solve the problem, but we didn't reach a resolution, and we'll be filing opposition Friday to that. That motion is also heard on November 7th in front of Judge Komar, and we'll give you an update about where that goes at the December meeting.
Is there any way to get the court to make them bond what we think their bill is?
Well, a bond relates to a potential money judgment, and this was not a money judgment. It was just what they appealed was Judge Komar's order telling them that they don't qualify for ramp down and amnesty for the first 2 years of the enforcement of the judgment. If you remember, parties don't have to pay RWA for 2016, 2017 pursuant to the judgment. Well, Phelan brought a motion saying that was them. They also got benefit of that, and the judge disagreed and said, actually, you don't have a right to produce any groundwater. Anything you get is essentially exported out of the basin, and you've got to pay RWA for every acre foot you take out. So they appealed that, and that's still pending. That's the issue that's pending. Judge Komar's order that's been challenged by Phelan. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I have a bad feeling that this bill is going to be so onerous when it finally comes to fruition that there's no way they could possibly pay it. So my theory is that they should bond for it, so that the bond pays for it. And they have more skin in the game, and they might be more apt to move forward.
Yeah, as a public agency, they don't have to bond a money judgment, so they're protected on that end, if it was a money judgment, which it wasn't. But I'll fill you in on where things go with the Phelan matter and SCI as the process goes forward. We'll get any oppositions to the SCI motion on Friday.
At the next meeting, can we get kind of a picture of how much money we're talking about? Because it's
Or feeling?
We know.
over $1 million. It's in here somewhere.
Yes, we have it. We have the number. They were sent an invoice. That's what.
No, I know, we've talked
Yeah.
about it for next month.
Sure.
Now we're into 3-4 years worth of pumping.
Is the November 7th hearing in person or?
It's a court call presently.
Dennis, I have a question for the board. I mean, some of these people that are still pumping, this has been going on for a long time. Is there such a thing as getting the court to cease and desist on them until we get this settled?
Well, we'd have to go in with a motion to the court, and we'd have to bring our evidence that they're in violation of the terms of the judgment. Then they can get an injunction appropriately. But get something preemptively is a problem.
And that would be an expensive process, I'm
It'd be an
assuming.
expensive process.
And on these other cases, are we asking for attorney's fees to the prevailing party, which would, hopefully would be us, like Phelan?
The recovery of attorney's fees is not in the motion with Phelan. The SCI motion is their motion to intervene, and we don't even have an opposition to it yet, so the fees wouldn't be appropriate. There's no legal basis for getting the fees on this motion as it stands.
And how about some of the other ones that are upcoming?
Yeah,
Your position will always be,
The cost motions for enforcement is a different animal. That we have authority under the judgment to recover the costs incurred, which we've briefed to the board, include attorney's fees. And that's my report.
Thank you. Becky, did you want to speak?
Did you brief us on item F?
It was covered under the, I kind of wrapped that into the metering and the small pumpers.
Okay.
I mean, the folks that are known producers pumping outside of the judgment, most of them were handed to me this morning by diligent staff doing their own footwork to identify parties that are parties to the judgment but defaulted, who are mutual water companies in like 5 of the cases, who are producing water with no right to do so under the judgment. That's who we're going to contact immediately.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard my name mentioned numerous times today, so I thought I'd come up. I'd just like to thank the board and this department for working with my attorney and finally getting this settled. It was a very rough year. So with Dad dying and this on our shoulders, it was hard, but I appreciate everything you've done. I especially appreciate that lady right there, because anytime I had a question, she was able to answer it, and she was very kind. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any future requests by the board?
I have one request. I'd like to see if the administrative staff can look at various options that might be available to us to try and help address the metering issue and also the pumping outside of the judgment. You know, there may be some other types of thinking, especially as we propose that for the new budget, if there's, you know, outside services that may be necessary, other types of things that may be able to help to, you know, we seem to be struggling at this, and maybe we need to take a kind of a fresh look at how we go about accomplishing getting all of our meter compliance and those kind of things moving forward.
Noted. Yeah, thank you.
I just have one thing to say to Becky. I've worked with your dad for many years and your family. I was never in doubt. The reputation that your family has in this valley continues to be outstanding, and thank you for setting the guidelines to which everyone behind you should follow. So I appreciate it.
Any other comments or questions? We're adjourned.